Today's topic, spiritual awakening stages and cycles. It's something I really want you to hold loosely. I think the cycles is almost more important than the stages thing, partially because with the term spiritual awakening, I'm very specific about what I'm talking about. Spiritual awakening, what I'm talking about, is like the floodgates have opened, and there's this quality of shift and change that keeps evolving and moving within you that you don't have control over. It's very intelligent. It leads us towards greater and greater realizations and openings and healings. For most people, they're on what I call the conscious path, which is where we all end up going if we're sincere with our spiritual interests, although not necessarily. Some people awaken and they truly have no interest in the spiritual path. See, that's the thing about the spontaneous awakening. It doesn't have anything to do with what you're doing. It just arises when you choose to arise, much like a seed sprouting. So you can put a lot of seeds in some wonderful conditions and they don't sprout. And others can be in terrible situations and they sprout. And so some people will sprout and they will not like what they see, and they will just find a place to level off and stay in that space. They won't necessarily try to embrace their spiritual growth. So it's just an interesting sidebar, but most of the rest of us were on what I call the conscious path. The conscious path is where we grow little by little or leap by leap over time, gradually. So if somebody is awakened, embracing the conscious path is an important thing, because that will tend to lead towards greater ease and peace and wonderful things like that. So my genuine assumption in this is that all of you are on the conscious path. Some of you may have awakened, some of you do not. It doesn't matter. And there's a whole host of spiritual realizations and revelations and glimpses of awakening that people experience that often will trigger us to make changes and to embrace the conscious path. But the thing about that is, if we're just on the conscious path, what happens is if you stop your discipline, all the changes stop in your life. The person in awakening does not really have that choice. They're along for the ride regardless whether they think they want that or not. So I just want to be very clear about how I'm using these terms. And I use these terms practically, not out of making other people special. That's an ego thing. I use terms to be helpful, because with a person in awakening, those of you who have that experience and are in that space, a lot of what we're doing is finding more space to allow and to embrace whatever is arising in the moment naturally on its own. With those who are not, who are on the conscious path, what we're usually doing with you is we're trying to intensify the energy in your life and within you to force things up, which with the awakening, that's already forcing stuff up in people to face it. Most of the rest of people, we have to help them build the practice to build that level of intensity, to start to reveal things, to turn that attention inwards, where the awakened person, in many respects, the attention is already turning itself inwards, and it's usually coming up against resistance that still wants to stay outwards. And the more resistance there is that wants to stay outwards, this is how we get into spaces like the dark night of the soul thing that people talk about. And I'll talk about that shortly. So starting with a purely awakened side of things, there's usually, as far as stages go, I've noticed there's a lot of preparation. This is not something you know during the time that it's happening, but it happens, and then later on you kind of figure out that you were preparing for something. Some of the ways that I've seen that stage go is a person, right, this is very natural. This isn't like, hey, I'm going to awaken. 90% of the time, it's not I'm going to awaken. It's just something someone's drawn to do for one reason or another. It's very, very rare that somebody who's actually seeking an awakening actually has one. A lot of people have lots of experiences, but experiences come and go. You get the glimpse of awakening. It can be very profound and very important. I'm not understating the importance of it, but I am devaluing the importance of experiences, because experiences will come and go. And if you chase experiences, you will make yourself miserable, because they're always changing. The human experience is always changing. So there's an interesting preparation time that can happen. And during that time, somebody starts to listen to Oprah's Sunday show or something like that. They start to get into self-improvement, or they start to get actual spiritual texts. Self-improvement, while not overtly spiritual, takes us towards that space of spiritual growth. It can be a wonderfully important thing for a lot of people to get started. And so how long does preparation last? Who knows? Right? I'm not going to give you a lot of definitives, and I really, as I said, encourage you to hold some of these categories loosely. For me, it was 9 months. Did I know I was preparing? No. I just noted, I felt something was opening inside, and I followed it. And I already was a spiritual person. So that there wasn't this bigger gap that other people have where they're not. They don't realize that listening to Oprah and relaxing and eating a burrito one day would eventually things would just shift and change their lives. And this is a true story that I just related for one of my students. So however long that preparation lasts is leading towards that initial opening, that initial awakening. Also part of preparation, I've been kind of going back and forth, but one of my other students, I've had 2 students where this has happened, where ego collapse happens before the awakening. It's just like there's so much pain in the system that the person just starts shutting down. And they start to have a lot of the awakened issues that people talk about a lot, and I've talked about, like the chronic fatigue and things like that, nameless body pains, and things like that. But I'm still kind of going back and forth how to frame it, as I talk to my students and their experience, those who've gone through it this way. It's interesting to offer better insights into it. But for now, I'm putting the ego collapse as part of a preparation, that things are just falling inwards. In some respects, I don't want to talk too much about it, but Eckhart Tolle, I don't want to speak for his experience, from what little I've heard, was going through a lot of ego collapse, right? Deep, dark depression. And then, it's this awakening to what's real. Right? So that can be part of it. It's very different than, let's talk about the way that people's lives don't go the way they want them to. So that's a little bit different. We tend to kind of make things worse and worse on ourselves, and it's not because we're moving towards a greater realization. We always can. At any given point, we can have any level of realization, we can awaken, right? Awakening is actually a timeless thing because it's always with us. That's why I like to use the metaphor of the sky that peeks out of the clouds. A lot of times when people start to get calm enough, something peeks through. And strangely enough, in things like the depression and the ego collapse, sometimes when things get stormy enough, something wakes up and says, this is just too ridiculous. This is just so absurd, right? This is not the path I encourage anybody down. And it's not often what happens, because there's so much pain that most people don't come to that realization. They usually come to bad places, suicide, which are things that we shouldn't do to ourselves. This life is a gift. And so the heaviness, the denseness of that reality, at some point, something about it, it's like it's so dense and so heavy that it cracks itself open. And there's this ego collapse, and then there's a space of awareness that comes forward from that crack. Now, a lot of people talk about the initial experience can be very blissful. That's usually the common thing, and it can be one of the worst experiences in the sense that people try to get it back. They want to have that experience back. And I've heard some people have managed to last in that space of bliss for 3, 6, 9 months. I don't know if, maybe I've heard of a story of somebody's lasted a year or 2 or something like that. It's the least interesting experience to me in many respects, because it is an experience. And it's not something we're supposed to hold on to. It's rather, it's showing us the truth. But usually as the light grows and shows us the truth, we start to see the mess we have been living in. And because the bliss is part of something we generally enjoy, like I don't know too many people who don't like that, but there can be the people issues, they don't feel good enough to have that experience, right? And so already they don't last in there as long, so they get catapulted into their issues quicker, right? So the issue of self-worth is coming up if somebody doesn't feel like they're good enough for these blissful feelings to last. And not everybody's going to feel bliss as the initial stage. Sometimes what they feel is disorientation. right? So there can be that deep level of connection and peace and serenity, which, and serenity to me is more of the matured state of bliss, where tends to be very high, and also the way people feel these things differs. So sometimes people are feeling very much kind of up here. It's just kind of like they're floating, wee, and you can't, in that space, you can't focus on much of the physical world. Some people are feeling it more in their heart. It's just like their heart is just bursting open, right? And you can feel all these different things. With some, you feel more one or more the other. It's just going to be your unique experience. And others can feel very viscerally in their body. It can feel very sexual in the body, just the way that everything is turned on. And so there's this immense openness and relaxation. There's this love and expression in the body and the heart and the mind. And it's different for everyone depending on where they go. And if somebody just completely awakens and drops every issue inside of them, which can happen, I haven't run across it because that's not the type of people who seek help online, and that wasn't my experience. But I don't ever want to limit anything out, then you just enjoy being here now. It's very simple. But disorientation, and that's not even just like one phase. That's something that can come back through the different cycles that I'm going to get to, which are going to be more applicable to everyone in this group. That I really want people to focus on that more than these stages. These stages, I think, are just, for some of you, it's just going to be kind of educational and interesting. And if an awakening ever occurs for you, or if you run across somebody who is going through these phases, then you can have more compassion. If any of you are new to me, I really encourage you to go find my blog about the spiritual caretaker, because that is such a beautiful and important role, because those of us, when we go into these deep spaces, don't have time to go work regular jobs and take care of some of the things before we could. So much energy gets turned inwards. The way I often described it during the height of my shifts, it was like I was running 3 marathons inside. It was just intense. So with disorientation, that's going to come and go. And sometimes the initial awakening part feels like there's this disorienting part, because the way you're looking at the world is changing. It's almost like, if I'm wearing one lens and the other eye doesn't have a lens, and I'm trying to look at life, right? And this phase, though, as I was building to this, comes under what I call the dispelling the darkness phase. And the dispelling the darkness phase, we're still allied more with the ego than with our awakened self. And so the ego, it doesn't necessarily get shown up during bliss because we like it. As I said, very few people are like, oh, I'm feeling great and fun and everything's beautiful and loving and I love everyone. We don't usually have a problem with that. So in that way, the ego can be actually hidden during a lot of bliss phases. It's not gone. It's just hidden because it's getting something it likes. And then at some point, and this is the dispelling the darkness phase tends to be a big one, right? Because we usually don't know how much trouble our ego self is causing us. We don't understand its limits. We don't understand how we created it. We don't really understand anything about it. We just think it's who we are. But it's not who we are. It's just a lens to look at life through, built up out of family patterns, social patterns, karma, genetics, our personal experiences, past life influences to some degree, a whole host of chance encounters that have shifted us one way or another, and this conglomeration of stuff put together into this pot. And we just think this is naturally who we are. It's habitually who we thought we are. And with awakening, this energy moves us. It moves us to show us all of the assumptions, and it moves us towards any abuse or trauma that we've experienced. And let's be very clear, I'm talking about abuse and trauma. I'm not just saying something was traumatized like a bad breakup. That doesn't even count. I mean, I'm sure there's some really upsetting things that happen in relationships, but I'm speaking more towards physical abuse, sexual abuse, extended intentional emotional abuse probably can come into that category. These are really big and deep issues, and many people who awaken have those issues and have to confront them. That is powerful, nasty work. So on top of all this energy that's moving, this opening that somebody may be feeling inside, they can be thrust right up against these hidden abuses. Some are hidden, some are known, and then they have to start to heal them. But usually when somebody awakens, they don't realize that that's what they're about to do, right? They just feel awful, right? So this is why we're still in the dispelling the darkness phase. We don't really understand what's happening. We don't understand the healing process and the cycles, which I'm going to be getting to here, that are going on inside that are trying to help us work through these things. Because any old pain, any old issue that we don't fully reckon with seems to get stored in the body. The energy body, the physical body, the emotional body, and the mental body, and they're all tied together. One of the powerful tools I've been really emphasizing in the last 2 weeks is using your body as a roadmap, as a guide to where all your issues are. That if there is tension in your body, there's a story in your body. There's a reason that it's there. The awakened energy just wants to flow freely. So when nothing is flowing, you don't feel anything. When something is flowing, it can run up against the rocks and the boulders and the dams that are stopping that inner flow inside us. In the dispelling the darkness phase, this is the phase where people are most likely to misunderstand what's happening, to blame this awakening, which is essentially themselves. It's their own energy it's moving. So to blame their own energy for causing pain. And there is a certain amount of pressure where this stuff starts to hit up against. And that's why I like the sense of that dam, the river hitting the dam. And this is not an appropriate dam to be there. So it's just pushing and pushing and pushing on this. It creates tremendous internal discomfort. And this is where I use metaphors like a deep tissue massage, where somebody's really getting into the muscle to break it apart, to open it back up into healthy functioning. But as I said, in the dispelling the darkness phase, which this is a big overarching phase, this is one that I think about in terms of years, that we sit there and we're on some scale of, sort of committed to the spiritual path or not at all committed to the spiritual path. And the less committed we are to what this change is, the more painful this is. The worse issues that are still stuck inside us, the worse things become to us, because we aren't embracing it. We're fighting ourselves. We're fighting the healing process. And this leads to many people being in a dark night of the soul. So can the ego collapse phase I was mentioning as part of the preparation. You're still allied with the ego self. You have ideas about how life should go. Life is not going the way you think it should go. And you just become more and more miserable as you feel like your ideas are failing, you're failing, it's not going your way. Life never goes our way. Because life is not an idea. And there are many, many forces in the world and within us that are moving things in a lot of different respects, in different ways. In the spiritual path, awakening asks us to embrace what actually is right now. Not what we think it should be, or where it should go, or what we wish it had been. It's imminently practical. And that's one of the interesting things as you go through the dispelling darkness phase. Those of us who start to gradually and slowly embrace the shift inside start to realize how impractical we've been, how insane we've been. Because one of the key elements of this phase of healing is you're just starting to get used to yourself. You're just starting to notice, wow, when I did embrace this issue and I went through the healing cycle that was going on inside, I felt better. That tension that was in my right shoulder suddenly just went away. I didn't do anything. I didn't massage it. I didn't move my shoulder around. I didn't do anything except for breathe into the pain that was already there. And then something released. Maybe it's a memory of your dad yelling at you. Suddenly that came up and gone. And then that issue drops. It's like, oh, this feels better. And then the next issue comes. With that next issue that comes, you're challenged again, and you find more of this inner discomfort. And everybody's ego is different. So some people are trying to get to the end of this. And so they'll kind of half embrace things, but that's not how it is, because ultimately we all have our natural growth cycles that I think would happen normally in life if we didn't start shutting ourselves down at a very early phase. And so we're coming back into our natural growth cycles. And this to me really is kind of the end of the story, is after all of these big shifts, these stages, we just go into our own growth cycles that we naturally would do if we didn't resist ourselves, if we just allowed things to be and to trust these inner intuitive abilities we already have that already know where we want to go, where we really want to go. And so the dispelling the darkness phase, when we're still fighting our intuitive knowing, right? We're still holding on to a relationship we need to leave. We're staying in a country we know we need to leave. It's usually a lot of that, right? This avoiding this transition of change. But it can easily go, when somebody shows up in your life who's just an amazing person for you to should be in your life, and you keep resisting that can be just as bad as holding on to the old bad relationship, because here is this opportunity being presented before you, who can help be a mirror and a doorway to something else. Jobs will do the same. Like one of the saddest stories. This guy I remember talking to like 7.5 years ago. Was talking about, because his ideal job was working at Tesla. For those of you who don't know, Tesla is an electric car maker who's been doing pretty well in the last several years. And this guy he wanted it, and then he got offered the job. And you know what? He didn't take it. I don't remember what his excuses were at the time, but after all this interest in taking it, or this is different than when we get something we thought we all wanted. We get in there and then we realize it's not what we really want. That's not how it felt to me. It was more like self-sabotage, that you actually get to the thing that intuitive part of you is trying to get you to something that will bring you bliss or happiness, general happiness, and then you say no. Although in the spiritual awakening, usually we attract in a lot of bigger, deeper lessons too. So that this is also sometimes when the phase where the soulmate or the twin flames show up, because they're usually the people that we're willing to put more of our cards, play more of our cards, move more of our chips into the game. We don't hold back as much. And they're usually our first introductions to deep connection. And they're actually just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many amazing deep connections we all have access to. Sometimes the twin flame and the soulmate, they excite that inner shift. They excite awakening. Partially because it's usually through sex, sex is such a powerful energy. And it does more than create babies and feel good. It can move us to awakening. But then, of course, as we learn our lessons from those people, not all soulmates and twin flames are meant to continue on with us. As I said, there are many types of deep connections, but then in the dispelling the darkness phase, we're still grasping onto everything and its cousin. We're just like, I want that, I want to hold on to that, or like, no, I can't handle that. And, it's just very reactive, very much based off of our old hidden assumptions about what's possible, what we can do, what we want. And we don't see any of those assumptions yet. That doesn't come yet. Usually we're just cleaning out the room. If there's trauma or abuse, we have to deal with that elephant in the room. You really don't get much further in your own inner healing and shifting until you deal with that big one. And then you can start to take out the carpet and take down all the stuff on the walls and get rid of the cabinets, and right. So these are all metaphors for all the things we're carrying around inside of us that are clogging up our space, that are burdening us. So how long the dispelling the darkness really goes until a point where you have to make a really big choice. I don't know what that choice is. It can be an innocuous sort of small choice where you just kind of suddenly realize, wow, I don't want to go back, and I want to go forward into this. Where on a deeper level, part of you really, really gets it, right? This is that embodied understanding of it. This change is what I want. And at this point, things are probably no more certain than they were before. Dispelling the darkness, there's still this grasping for certainty and wanting things to be a certain way, or wanting to go back to the way things were because that was somehow better. This is the switch. This is the big turning point. where we go into the embracing your light phase, because that's when you join more fully with yourself, with that awakened space where you say, this is what I want. That while my old life is gone, the old job is gone, the old home is gone, the old relationships are gone. This very much describes me, actually. Uh, all that stuff was gone so fast. But if the ideas inside, if the ego element inside is not addressed, it will just put on new clothing. It'll just say, okay, so I got rid of this business thing, and now I'm going to put on all these spiritual robes and ideas and walk around with an Om symbol on my chest. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you have to be honest with yourself. Are you just trying to play a new game that you think will make you feel good and feel safe? And even as I'm saying those phrases, I'm pointing to deeper hidden issues that are part of all of us human beings. And the embracing your light phase takes you towards some of the hardest and gunkiest issues. It's interesting how, in some respects, there's more ease and more intensity in that phase. The dispelling the darkness, because there's so much grasping, it's actually very surface level in many respects. It's less, just like turbulent waves. It's not dealing with the deeper currents in the ocean yet. So the general phases thus far, that sort of preparation which you may not know that you're doing, and or ego collapse for some people. And as I said before, that there can be that sense of the dark night of the soul there sort of going on, but it's definitely more of a hopeless place because the light hasn't really come through. There's your initial awakening, whatever that is, which can be very blissful, it can be disorienting, or it can go straight into fear triggering to start healing, depending on how much fear and pain is inside you. And that's all part of the dispelling the darkness phase I was mentioning. And then the turning point. And sometimes the turning point really is like 50, you go to 51% of you is embracing your light and 49 is still dispelling your darkness. Because it's not a hard rule. I mean, I can point to where my change into embracing my light was, and that's in 2010 when I really started to focus on writing the blog and I claimed the space of being a spiritual teacher. And then there's a switch, and it didn't necessarily get easier. Like more intensity came up inside me. Because now your energy is available to really hit the hard stuff, to start to knock down walls and ceilings, right? The structural stuff of how you're looking at your life that otherwise is so hidden, and in some respects so hidden in plain sight that you can't see it. And dispelling the darkness, you're still trying to grasp at a soulmate. Embracing your light, you say, why do I need partnership for love? Where is this part of me that is grasping for love through another person? What is love? Where does that feeling come from? Oh, that feeling comes from inside me. If the feeling comes from inside me, what difference does it make who's in my life? If I choose to be in my own space of love, then I can be around pretty much anyone. Right? So this is a different quality of the embracing your light. And this is, speaking from a deeper level of awareness that starts to see through these other games that were trying to get you things. Now, through all of this, let's talk about the healing cycles, because all of us can go through these different cycles of expansion and contraction. In awakening, it can feel like you're hyperventilating because you're expanding and contracting through issues and opening up into new spaces, or reclaiming spaces within you that were already there, that were just cluttered. We'll stick with a clutter metaphor today. So when people are stuck or just living their lives without any sort of awareness, these things actually do try to happen, where we expand and contract and we go through growth phases, but we usually resist them because we think whatever we have now is safe. That's usually one of the core issues that we all have to dig down into. But for the time being, without awareness, the striving for safety seems normal and natural. We don't realize that the striving for safety is the very thing that's making us feel unsafe, or one of the things that's making us feel unsafe. And so, in effect, it is creating its own problem. But when things start to move, and for those of you on the conscious path, when you're starting to build up intensity in your life, to look at parts of yourself, to go into these spaces where things are a little uncomfortable, you're starting to excite your inner energy that wants to move through things. Kundalini yoga is a great tool to get people who aren't in those depths of awakening moving. I think once you're in depths of awakening, I don't know Kundalini yoga too well, but mainly I would recommend calming energy practices for those who are in awakening. Calming, integrating, grounding, not exciting. But Kundalini yoga just comes as an idea of ways to start to move things, to build up that inner intensity. And you have to start to get used to being uncomfortable in these new ways, uncomfortable in your body, having more awareness of that discomfort and moving towards it. Because when your cycles start to move, you go into this expansion, and then you expand to the point where you hit your next issue. That next thing that's holding you back from completely growing and letting go and being as you are. And that pulls you down. You contract, right? Your attention turns inwards. I find during those phases I have much less energy to do anything in the external world. It tends to get darker and muddier, and you're not really sure what you're going into. You start to feel a new level of discomfort. And I help a lot of people learn how to source that. And so that's coming back to the body. Like, okay, so where is this discomfort in my body? Okay, here it's hiding in my chest. Okay, so now I'm breathing into my chest. What is this about? And then you sit with it. You sit in the darkness and you bring your awareness. When you bring your awareness, you're already starting to dispel the darkness. Right? You're starting to look at it. The dark is where our light does not look. And on the spiritual path, we learn to look at all of us. So as you're sitting here and different emotions start to come up, different physical sensations start to come up, it's easier to be tuned into your intuition as to what you need. But you don't need a lot. If we get too caught up trying to find the perfect tool, you're missing the point. And the point is that your awareness is always the tool of the time. But every now and then a little extra support from a teacher or a healer, from a particular meditation that works for you can be good. And then suddenly starts to break. Suddenly starts to break down inside, which tends to make things more uncertain at first. But you do start to, at that point, as that kind of like cracking into a boulder, suddenly starts to open up and you start to see things that were stuck inside. And depending on what's coming up, that can be really, really intense because people hold a lot of intense pain and memory inside. So some people will run away from that. Being a mindful person, you turn towards it. Breathe into it. Start to notice, okay, there's this pain, there's this issue that's coming up. I'm going to breathe into it. I'm going to be with it. And then you start to process it. Processing simply means allowing whatever emotions and physical sensations do come up and to decharge. Because another way of looking at this, like being struck by lightning, right? If you don't let that energy out, you feel terrible. And so what we do is we start to grasp all that energy into little tiny balls inside us and try to hold on to it so we stop feeling electrocuted. So that stuff doesn't decharge, and it requires a lot of energy to hold on to intense energy. The more intense, so like trauma and abuse especially, the more intense it is, the more energy you have to put into suppressing it. This is why a lot of drug and alcohol abuse can happen for somebody who's been physically or sexually abused, because they need that much additional resistance to pile on top of that lightning strike that's still vibrating through the intensity of that trauma. But then, if you're sincere, it will discharge. It starts to come out of you. And things start to relax and release. You get energy back because all the energy that was stuck in that thing is now able to free flow in a healthy way again. And all the energy you were putting on top of that to hold it comes back to you as well. And so this generally tends to lead us back towards another expansion. There can be disorienting phases during the expansion too, because depending on how deep and dark something is releasing, it was skewing how you were seeing life. And so suddenly, like, your eyes open again, you're like looking around, like, whoa, everything looks different again, right? So we'll continue with the abuse issue because it's something I work a lot with people. You know, that skews how you see things. You tend to see everything as a threat to you in some ways. And you're always kind of on higher alert because of how agitated and activated your system is constantly going down there. Even if you feel like it's not, it is, until that stuff comes out. When it comes out, then you start saying, oh my goodness, I was looking at so many people as like there were threats, or this job was a threat, or there's a problem and I wasn't going to be safe, so I had to control it or get away from it, right? These are very common ways people interact with life. And then when that charge goes that was stuck inside, that was skewing how you're seeing life, suddenly everything looks different. You're like, what was my problem with this job or this person? And it's like, I feel like I don't know these things, these people. And you don't. You've been lost in your own projection, your own pain. So that sort of expansion can take some time to breathe in and to reorient. And you physically will often feel very different if you've had a very deep pain held inside. For the smaller issues that bubble up and go, like, the time, like I said earlier, the example of your dad yelling at you, then there's not as much, generally speaking, around that. And you're just like, oh, okay, right. And you continue on, and you're still relatively clear. You're not having that reorientation phase. It's not a phase, that's part of the cycle. Because these cycles that I'm mentioning happens through all those other bigger phases, although not usually so much in the ego collapse phase. Usually nothing is moving at that point. It wants to move, but there's so much resistance, so much pain, everything's just crashing inwards. It can happen a little bit in the preparation phase. I think I felt that a little bit back in the days when I was like, ooh, a little bit of inner shift, and I thought it was a big deal. And so these cycles are present for all of us. As you begin to understand your cycle and you embrace them, it becomes a very powerful thing. And then you make space for those shifts. And when you make space for it, it's easier to go through them. And even if it's not fun, it does seem to be a little bit quicker. And eventually everything from the grand story of spiritual awakening, it calms down and goes into whatever your regular cycles are. I don't know what those are for people because it's different for everyone, how you just naturally want to shift and grow. And I like to use the idea of seasons, 4 seasons, where there's going to be times when your natural energy, no longer processing through so much stuff, and have relaxed into yourself, and you've been sincere and embracing this inner awareness and embracing your light. And then, there's times for spring and summer and fall and winter, where you grow, you're productive, and then you rest. And we just trust that. We don't resist it. So I think this is a good place for me to pause and to see if people have any questions. For anyone who's new, you just type down in the chat pod and we have a conversation that way. And there's really no end point. I mean, death is about the only real end point there is in life. It's just continuing change of different kinds. I think with awakening or with any sort of dedication on spiritual path, what we do is we stop holding on to traumatic situations or upsetting situations. The part of us that would consider something to be upsetting gets deconstructed. That's the unconscious ego. And what we build up is a conscious ego. And that simply means we understand that we're looking through a lens. When we understand that, we do a couple of things. One, we're humble. We don't assume the view that we have is the only view. We don't even assume it's like the most accurate view. We honor that we have a certain perspective, but we start to look for our own limitations more naturally and see where they are, while still trusting very deeply in our inner knowing and our intuition that we've been cultivating. The conscious ego, we know we can let go of ideas and beliefs. We're not holding on to beliefs. So that's one of the big things that differentiates someone who got stuck in the dispelling the darkness phase. We're still essentially in the darkness. They just put on new ego clothes. And there's lots of spiritual egos running around who decided to believe in all sorts of different things. Right? And the belief really is just a way to make us try and feel safe about ourselves. Right? That's what the seeking of meaning and purpose generally is about. It's about making us feel safe or feel good more generally. Because when we feel safe, we feel good. Right? It's a big, big game. But the conscious ego understands what we really want, what you really want. It's not operating from the initial programming anymore. And you understand that you can reprogram it at any time. If you have a certain type of belief in God at one point, you let that evolve and change. You let everything evolve and change. You don't hold on. Hi, Tobias. Well, the reprogramming is more of a deprogramming, so don't even think about reprogramming at first. That will happen on its own. That's the beautiful part of our inner intelligence, Tobias. There's this natural growth that happens within us when we make space to listen to ourselves. We start to have a certain way we want to flow. The deprogramming is more important because that's what stops us from flowing. Right? So that's what leads to all the intensities that I've been describing in the expansion, contractions. Contraction is going down to deprogram. So we have these old pains and traumas that we've had to deal with, and so we're releasing those charges and releasing the ideas around that got built up around that. Because whenever we're traumatized, there's a part of us that says, I never want to feel this again. And so we start to create all these different ideas about how to keep ourselves safe and who we want to relate to and what types of jobs we want to do and all those types of things that greatly influence how we live our lives. And so, in effect, it limits how we can live our lives. And we're doing that actually in a certain, very deliberate way, that we're trying to limit the way we live our lives so we can feel safe, but it doesn't have that effect. It makes us, most of people, miserable. Or you're just kind of generally content. That seems to be the high point, with occasionally getting what you want in some sort of way leads to a certain level of exuberance, but it's so quick and gone so soon. You know, and some people can live in that level of contentment. A lot of people in society do. So long as they mostly have gotten what they think they want, then they can avoid and insulate themselves from things that they think they don't want. Then they think they're happy. A lot of the big parts of the deprogramming is you have to realize just how unhappy you actually are. And that's just simple awareness. Simple awareness starts to show these things. You feel it in your body. Your body does not lie. It is so good about not lying. Because if your body feels good, it feels good. If as you're sitting in meditation, you start to notice all these pains in your body, aside from the usual things that can come up when you're sitting, all that's happening is you're noticing. Meditation is not making you feel bad. As I said, like with the whole awakening thing, awakening is not making you feel bad. It is simply bringing light and a certain measure of energetic intensity to your issues. If there are no issues to block that flow, you don't feel bad. So some of the ways to start to notice your programs is to notice what you're afraid of. And that's where you start to deprogram. Thanks for the question, Tobias. Let me know if that was helpful. What else are on people's minds? Good. If there's a specific issue anyone is cycling through, feel free to share that too. We can talk about that cycle and how to keep that level of focus to drop deeper. And self-worth issues are just so huge and so common. And it comes from the fundamental misunderstanding of ourselves, a misunderstanding that thinks that we need to be somebody to be happy. And this is why I wrote a blog some time ago called Be Nobody. With all this energy that we place into being somebody, it's exhausting. And it's ultimately futile. We keep trying and trying to be somebody, impress other people, impress ourselves, And we're doing that because we have a set of ideas and beliefs inside about what we need to be. And the more we feel like we're failing, the more desperate we get, the more upset we get, the more angry we get, the more scared we get, the more depressed we get. It's just horrible. And so you'll notice that a self-worth issue like that is one of the ones that you feel like you're going to work with again and again. You'll find it rooted in your shoulder, in your chest, in your gut, in your legs, in your genitalia, in your mouth, and it'll just be all over the place depending on where you don't believe in yourself, where you're trying to prove yourself. If you're trying to prove yourself vocally or through education, or through your sexuality, or through your body, your physical appearance. There's so many different ways. And so much of what we really are doing with healing is just allowing that upset feeling to be there, allowing it to work itself out, to no longer believe in it, and not resist the feelings that come up when it's coming up inside of us. Awakening in some respects is just taking us to our natural experience of us. Unencumbered, free, relaxed, open, clear, loving, kind. Very simple. It's not a big effort. Another comment from Tobias. Yes, that is what is going on for me now with deep self-worth issues, but it seems like the process is speeding up. Many emotions coming up, but mostly feeling peaceful. Good, I'm glad it's speeding up. The more we embrace, that's also a quality of embracing your light, is especially with certain issues, like the ones that aren't quite as deeply ingrained, there's this tendency where things start to speed up because there's more of our own energy, more of our awareness is turned towards the process now. It's not resisting it. It's not being dragged kicking and screaming down the spiritual path. It's not trying to paddle upstream. And so we just allow these emotions to come up and decharge and keep dropping into awareness. Keep dropping into the roots. I mean, that would be my encouragement towards you, Tobias, to drop into the roots of the emotions. See, where is this coming from? Is this still coming from an idea? Where is it rooted in the body? The body doesn't lie. And when you get to the roots that are hiding out in the body and the energy body, which it's all intertwined, then a lot of those emotions just disappear entirely. It's like getting to the bottom of a weed. The weed stops regrowing, which is always something to be mindful with emotions. A lot of people are very unskillful with emotions and can get lost in them and believing in them and wallow in them and that type of thing. And that's not what we're doing. When we're processing emotions, we're simply allowing them. And we're allowing ourselves to drop more deeply into understanding any pain that we need to understand. Right? And that's an appropriate use of the mind and an appropriate use of the conscious ego, which turns towards these things and says, where is this sadness coming from? What is it about? And sometimes there's not a lot that's going to be said by that sadness to you. The answer really does come through the issue. It comes up to you intuitively. And that's another respect why practicing your intuitive knowing and what I was doing with everybody at the beginning, where you start to breathe and relax and turn inwards, is so critical. It helps you hear your own truth, the truth of the pain you're carrying and the truth of the light you have inside. What else do people want to talk about today? Coming to a close. And so for anyone who's new, if you enjoy this webinar, donations are appreciated. Webinars are always free. The donations are very helpful. And today's blog post, because I'm lately I've been getting into a rhythm of doing some new ones every other Wednesday, along with the next webinar announcement. And the next webinar, I think I'm going to do about highly sensitive people. I usually do that once a year. But anyway, today's new post is the 5 motivational tips to keep you going through tough issues. I think that's definitely relevant to any sort of healing cycle. Although our idea of what a tough issue changes over time. I mean, the things that I usually think were tough, now I look back, I'm like, wow, that was just child's play. And that's part of the deeper level of self-confidence that comes through knowing your own space. A huge level of confidence comes. So people who have really walked the healing paths and the awakened path, and those who are really dedicated to spiritual growth. And those are all 3 different things. Sometimes there's overlap and sometimes there's not. Although there's, generally speaking, healing that we all do as we grow spiritually, but spiritual growth by itself actually feels different to me than healing does, than the initial awakening surges that I remember experiencing a whole lot of. So any last questions? Thoughts, well wishes, lucky lotto numbers? It's feeling like there isn't. So please use whatever has been useful in this webinar today. And, let the rest wash away. I really encourage you towards being dedicated in your practices. And of course, feel free to reach out with questions or sessions to me. And if you're guided to do so. Have a beautiful day, everyone.